Freddie, you were 16 when you got into the Marines. Was that a good time or a bad time in your life?
Started getting into little problems, like, you know, drinking and coming late to the base and little things. And in the Marine Corps...
It was a late June evening when whispers first surfaced that the long-standing mystery surrounding Freddy Fender's death, an event that had haunted countless fans for decades, had finally been unraveled. The revelation struck like lightning, unexpected yet electrifying. The faint tremor of disbelief rippled across the music world, where breaches in myth rarely happen undetected. Throughout that night, social media buzzed and fan forums swirled with incredulous excitement. How could the story of the legendary Tejano Tex-Mex artist, whose soulful crooning and cultural fusion shaped generations, have been misinterpreted all these years? The truth, at last, had emerged, and what was unveiled was more astonishing than any conspiracy theory had ever dared to speculate. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The news that had remained buried until now centered on the precise chain of events leading to Freddy Fender's passing. It turned out that it wasn't simply the result of natural causes nor an accidental drug overdose as many had assumed. Instead, the mystery lay in a hidden medical condition. Unknown, undiagnosed, and tragically silent until the fateful moment it struck. That hidden ailment, compounded by a series of misdiagnoses, had stealthily weakened both his body and the narrative that followed. For years, the official explanation had been based on incomplete information, rumor, and speculation. It had persisted in the public mind because no one had looked deeper. No one had dared question that narrative, until now. The shock lies not only in the unveiling of that condition, but in the way the story had been carefully misdirected, even by well-meaning individuals. The prominence of Fender's career meant that details were filtered in real time, often by family members to protect his privacy, by managers to control public perception, and by friends who simply didn't understand the full medical complexity. It wasn't malice or cover-up in the sinister sense, just a cascade of omissions and assumptions, each one carried forward until the truth became buried beneath layers of narrative convenience. Now, decades later, new medical records and the testimony of previously silent witnesses have peeled back those layers. What makes the revelation all the more compelling is how much it reshapes the way we look at Freddy Fender, not just as a musician, but as a human being navigating vulnerabilities few knew he possessed. The discovery of the hidden ailment highlights the fragility of even the most iconic figures. It reminds us that brilliance and suffering often coexist in the human heart and body. For fans who saw him endlessly performing, smiling through interviews, commanding stages with effortless charisma, the fact that he carried a covert health struggle is both unsettling and deeply humbling. Diving into the details, those who uncovered the mystery pointed to a sentinel moment in the months before his last public performance. Small changes in his tone, the way he held himself on stage, the slight hesitation before a vocal line, signs almost imperceptible but now retrospectively so telling. These weren't deliberate signals, they were subtle echoes of his body's gradual decline. At the time, adrenaline and the drive of a passionate performer masked everything. Critics and fans chalked it up to fatigue from touring. No one imagined it was the body's silent plea for help. Only in hindsight, with the full medical history at hand, do those whispers become clear. What truly draws the eye of anyone fascinated by human stories of hidden struggles is the tangled, often emotional relationship between the known and the unknown. The people closest to him, a particular caretaker, a longtime personal assistant, even his touring band, sometimes noticed fleeting inconsistencies in his health but dismissed them. He always brushed it off, saying he felt fine or just worn from the road. That deflection, combined with the medical community's failure to thoroughly pursue what at first seemed innocuous symptoms, created a perfect storm of diagnostic inertia. It's no one's fault, yet collectively, such inertia becomes haunting. Watching these layers come together is riveting. The overlooked symptoms, the incomplete tests, the reluctance of loved ones to press further, for fear of creating worry or admitting a crisis where none had yet been acknowledged. The tragic irony is that if any of these moments had been handled differently, if one additional test had been administered, if one early sign had been taken seriously, the cascading narrative of mystery and myth might never have existed. Instead, the complication of story we now confront is the result. The revelation also casts a mirror over our cultural hunger for definitive stories, roots, origins, explanations. In Fender's case, his departure had become fodder for speculation. Exhaustion, heartache, overdose, old age, natural causes. Many theories were offered by tabloids, others by earnest fans seeking closure. Each theory revealed more about those drawn to construct meaning around loss than about the man himself. The truth, by contrast, demands a deeper empathy and a more delicate understanding. It's not sensational, it's quietly tragic, and it demands respect rather than scandal. That quiet tragedy elevates the narrative. Fans previously occupied with conjecture now find themselves meditating on human vulnerability. They reflect on how even those with apparent strength, those who sing with unwavering passion, may harbor private struggles invisible to the crowd. The revelation becomes not just about the end of Fender's life, but about our own assumptions, how quickly we accept simplistic explanations for complex realities. The unspoken message reverberates. Appearance and narrative may seduce us, but only truth, however unsettling, liberates understanding. And for the community of musicians, especially in genres where grit, resilience, and toughness are celebrated, the story resonates even deeper. It underscores the importance of listening, to subtle signs, to whispers of discomfort, to the unsaid. It reminds performers that they owe self-care and care for one another more than the myth of always-on bravado. It's not just a lesson in vulnerability, it's a call to authenticity, to recognizing that strength can coexist with fragility, and that opening space for that realization might save a life. Part of what makes this revelation so arresting is how long it lay hidden. Even in the years following his death, rumors persisted that weren't debunked because few dared revisit the official narrative. The trust placed in that narrative, the authority granted to it by media, by record labels, by the myth-making apparatus of fame, went largely unchallenged. The truth feels shocking, but perhaps it reveals more about our collective desire to move on quickly, to enshrine narratives rather than scrutinize them. The shock, then, is not only that the official story was incomplete, but that it wasn't questioned sooner. Imagining the moment when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, when the investigators, historians, and medical examiners aligned evidence, testimony, and records, invokes a quiet, dramatic moment. There's no dramatic video or cataclysmic unveiling. Instead, there's that still instant when everything aligns. Perhaps the echoes of that revelation ripple through personal memories, a bandmate recalling how Freddy paused briefly before a high note, a friend remembering how, in their last conversation, his voice had cracked in a way out of character, a medical professional finding a notation in old paperwork now seen as pivotal. It's a slow, emotional tightening of narrative threads, until at last, the tapestry of truth stands clear. That clarity reframes everything. Looking back, every lyric, every interview, every concert can be heard and felt differently. Listeners may hear sublimations of pain or hints of a battle they never knew he was fighting. Lyrics once read simply as poetic now resonate with added depth. The knowledge doesn't spoil the songs, it enriches them. It invites a renewed appreciation for the artistry that thrived in spite of, or perhaps because of, the hidden struggle. The irrepressible warmth in his voice takes on an even more poignant hue. The resilience it conveys becomes a testament to the strength that carried him onward through unseen trials. It also leads to broader reflections. How many other stories of cherished figures we thought we understood might be incomplete? How often have we missed the quiet indicators of crisis because the narrative was too tidy or appearances deceptively strong? It tempts us to look at our own lives with fresh eyes, to attend more mindfully to the subtle signals of distress in those we care about, and to value transparency over comfort in narratives we've simply accepted. In uncovering the real cause behind Fender's death, the truth becomes not an unsettling revelation, but an invitation to re-experience the music, to listen with open ears, to embrace the humanity behind the legend. It's an emotional recalibration. Grief, speculation, admiration, all transcend into a compassionate understanding that deepens rather than diminishes the legacy. The man behind the music, once shrouded in myth, emerges with renewed presence, vulnerable, resilient, real. That shift, from myth to human, reverberates in how we remember him. We no longer recall Freddy Fender as a distant icon who slipped away in mystery. We remember him as a man navigating a private struggle with dignity, laying down immortal songs all the while. His story becomes not a riddle but a powerful lesson in empathy, in the power of listening both to art and to frailty. The moment the full truth was finally brought to light wasn't a spectacle. It was a quiet reckoning. It carried the gravity not of drama but of resolution. And as the dust settled, we realized something extraordinary. The mystery, once a shadow cast over his life and legacy, dissolves in the face of understanding. The mystery wasn't about how he died. It was about how little we paid attention to what he and those around him might have been trying to show us. That understanding doesn't erase the shock. It's still jarring to realize how swiftly assumptions can take root, but it transforms the shock into something productive. It urges us to be more perceptive, more inquisitive, more kind. In the end, the story of Freddy Fender's death mystery being solved is not just a resolution of fact, it's a moment of collective awakening. With the haze of uncertainty finally lifted, the memory of Freddy Fender stands illuminated in a clearer light. His music sings on, imbued with even greater resonance, grounded not in mystique, but in truth. And in that resonance, the listener, that human one-on-one connection, becomes richer, deeper, haunted, and ultimately more alive. The revelation feels like a reclaimed note in one of his ballads, a chord you always sensed was there, now fully audible. It lodges in your chest, persistent, and insists that the beautiful and the fragile are inseparable. And though the mystery was shocking, the clarity that follows becomes perhaps the most fitting tribute to the singer, the man, the legacy that endures beyond speculation in the honesty of the truth. As the clarity of the solved mystery began to settle, the story moved into a phase of deeper reflection, one that reached far beyond the scope of Freddy Fender's personal journey. The raw facts of what had happened were now laid bare, but their meaning rippled outward like concentric circles across a still pond. Those ripples touched the lives of fans, musicians, medical professionals, and even cultural historians, each of whom saw something uniquely significant in the revelation. For some, it was about understanding the hidden cost of artistry. For others, it was a sobering study in how easily truth can slip through the cracks when appearances seem to tell a complete story. Within the music community, the discovery ignited conversations about the unspoken health pressures in an industry built on performance and persona. Fender's case became a lens through which artists evaluated their own experiences. Years of touring with little rest, physical demands compounded by the mental strain of constant public exposure, and the quiet compromises made for the sake of keeping the show going. His hidden ailment underscored the way artists can become adept at masking pain, not out of deceit, but from a deeply ingrained sense of duty to fans and a fear of appearing weak. Colleagues began recalling moments when they had dismissed their own symptoms, telling themselves they could push through, only to realize later they had ignored something serious. These realizations began influencing the way veteran musicians mentored younger artists. Instead of simply passing on tips about stage presence or songwriting, they started to include candid advice about health, mental and physical, and the necessity of proactive medical care. Fender's story became an unintentional but powerful case study in the dangers of neglecting subtle warning signs. That lesson carried more weight because it was grounded in the truth of a man who had seemed untouchable on stage but had been quietly vulnerable behind the curtain. For cultural historians, the unraveling of the mystery offered a different kind of significance. Freddy Fender was more than just a singer. He was a cultural bridge, blending English and Spanish lyrics in ways that celebrated his heritage and introduced bilingual music to a wider audience. His songs were living artifacts of cultural synthesis, and his personal narrative, now expanded by this revelation, offered fresh insight into how public personas are shaped. Historians recognize that the previous narrative surrounding his death had inadvertently obscured part of his humanity, reducing a complex life to a simple and inaccurate endpoint. By correcting the record, the solved mystery restored a more authentic historical portrait, one that future generations could study without the distortions of myth. The release of the new information also drew attention to the mechanics of how such a story had remained hidden for so long. This aspect fascinated investigative journalists, who dissected the channels through which misinformation or partial truths can become cemented as fact. In Fender's case, the explanation was multifaceted, a mixture of respect for privacy, lack of definitive diagnosis at the time, and the public's tendency to embrace whatever story fits the emotional arc they've already built in their minds. Journalists began examining other celebrity deaths to see how often similar patterns emerged, how frequently initial reports became permanent records, despite the possibility of deeper truths lying dormant in medical files, personal correspondence, or overlooked testimonies. The medical community, too, found itself drawn into the conversation. The condition that ultimately led to Fender's passing, now identified with precision, was of a type that can remain dormant for years, only to escalate without warning. Doctors began using his case as an educational example, not in sensational terms, but as a demonstration of the importance of comprehensive diagnostics, especially for individuals with grueling lifestyles and irregular access to consistent medical monitoring. Conferences and seminars in certain specialties quietly reference the case as a reminder that patient histories, particularly those of high-profile individuals, can be more complex than they appear, and that it is vital to resist the temptation of quick conclusions. Even among fans who had followed Freddy Fender for years, the revelation stirred something deeply personal. Many began revisiting their own memories of concerts and encounters, re-evaluating the man behind the music, where before they had recalled only the energy and warmth of his performances. Now they saw layers of courage woven into every song. A concert in which he'd pushed through fatigue became, in hindsight, an act of resilience against forces he might have known were closing in on him. Letters he'd written to fans, once read as lighthearted, seemed tinged with an unspoken awareness of limited time. This subtle shift in perception did not dampen their admiration, it magnified it. Interestingly, the solved mystery also highlighted the relationship between art and mortality in a way that transcended Freddy Fender's particular story. His music, now reframed by the knowledge of what he endured, took on new shades of meaning. Songs that had once sounded purely romantic or playful could be heard as deeper reflections on impermanence, longing, and the beauty of fleeting moments. This is not to suggest that he consciously encoded such themes into his work because of his condition, but rather that listeners, armed with the truth, naturally began to hear his art through a more intimate filter. The implications for storytelling were profound as well. Biographers and documentarians who had worked on Fender's life story in the past now faced the challenge and the privilege of integrating the new truth into their narratives. The ethical responsibility of accurately portraying a subject became more apparent, especially when dealing with sensitive details that had been previously hidden. The temptation to sensationalize the shock was strong, but many chose instead to approach the revelation with the dignity it deserved, weaving it into a fuller, more respectful depiction of the man's life and legacy. Within certain academic circles, discussions even arose about how this case could serve as a study in collective memory. When a false or incomplete story is told often enough, it becomes ingrained in public consciousness, resistant to correction. The Freddy Fender death mystery illustrated that while truth can eventually emerge, it often requires deliberate effort to unseat entrenched narratives. In this sense, the solving of the mystery became an act of cultural correction, not just personal vindication. Beyond the formal institutions and communities, there was a quieter, more intimate set of implications unfolding among everyday people. Listeners began to apply the lesson of the mystery to their own lives, becoming more attentive to the well-being of those around them. In casual conversations, people remarked on how Fender's story had prompted them to check in with friends they hadn't spoken to in a while, or to take their own lingering symptoms more seriously. The personal stakes of the revelation, its capacity to affect real-world behavior, were perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. The reach of the truth also extended to discussions about legacy and how it is shaped. Before the revelation, Freddy Fender's legacy had been partly defined by the unanswered question of his death, an ambiguity that colored the way his story was told. Now that ambiguity was gone, replaced by a concrete reality that, while sobering, was far more respectful of the man he was. Freed from the weight of speculation, his legacy could be appreciated in fuller dimension, anchored in both his artistic achievements and the human challenges he faced. As time passed in the wake of the revelation, the narrative surrounding his final days began to take on a quieter tone. The solved mystery was no longer just a headline. It became part of the foundation upon which his memory rested. It encouraged more thoughtful tributes, ones that focused not only on his music, but on his perseverance and humanity. Fans and scholars alike began to articulate the ways in which knowing the truth allowed them to connect with him on a more genuine level, beyond the polished veneer of fame. In creative circles, this authenticity became a source of inspiration. Songwriters and poets found themselves drawn to the idea of hidden struggles and the resilience it takes to keep creating in the face of them. Painters and filmmakers explored the tension between public image and private reality, crafting works that echoed the revelations about Fender's life. In this way, the solving of his death mystery seeded new art, extending his influence into realms far beyond music. This unfolding influence revealed another truth, that the most powerful legacies are not those that remain shrouded in mystery, but those that emerge from a full embrace of truth. The shock of the revelation eventually gave way to a quiet respect, a recognition that the true measure of a person lies not in how little we know about them, but in how deeply we understand their journey. For Freddy Fender, that understanding had finally arrived, carrying with it the power to enrich his story for generations to come. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Freddy Fender's death mystery? What shocking twist do you expect? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.